What's up guys, this is Cromar with TGN, and today I'm here to bring you part 3 of my Monster Guys series. Today we're covering Ogres, all 4 varieties of Ogres you find in Orcs Must Die. These guys are the biggest and nastiest monsters that the game is going to throw at you. They usually come at you one at a time, or sometimes in very small ways. But in any size, Ogres are meant to represent a huge threat that requires your undivided attention. In this guide, however, I'll show you how to totally neutralize those guys so you can concentrate on catching kobolds and loose orcs. First, we'll talk about strategies that center around your character, and then finish up with some crazy contraptions that make ogres totally obsolete. Ogres come in 4 varieties: normal, fire, frost, and armored. Normal and fire are the easiest to counter, so we'll cover them first. Normal and fire ogres share one huge weakness: the freeze spell. Now, you've probably already discovered that freezing ogres is the best way to disable them, but killing them quickly is another story. Let's go through the best ways to kill them once they're frozen. Most people opt for the crossbow headshot. Now, this works fine if you have the time. With fire ogres, though, it does take quite a bit of headshots. I greatly prefer to use the sword. If you freeze an ogre when you're right on top of them, you can get 6 swings in before the ogre unfreezes. This is enough to kill a regular ogre, and almost enough for a fire ogre. If you freeze at a distance and run in, you'll only have time for 5 swings before you have to retreat. Remember, the ogre swing will stun you long enough for 2 hits. During this time, you can easily die from swarming orcs or other baddies. If you execute a freeze and slash combo correctly and safely, you can kill the ogres fast enough to waste minimal time. The most effective frozen ogre killer is the swinging mace. The only other trap that does noticeable damage is the wall blade, but that requires more precise positioning. Try placing a paladin behind your death hallway and allow him to engage with the stun ability. Once the ogres are stunned and in the kill zone, safely freeze them with the right click and wait for the mace to finish them off. Fire arrow archers backing the paladin will help speed things up if the mace doesn't get the kill in the first swing. A last resort if things are extremely hectic is to freeze the ogre, preferably with the long duration right click, and just run away. You can kite the ogre while killing other dangerous targets like kobold runners or no hunters. You might even be able to lure the ogre into your traps. Generally though, this sort of action comes out of desperation and not planning. You want to set things up so you don't have to do these kind of acrobatics. As for unfrozen ogres, a swinging mace, stun paladin, and archer setup can usually handle regular and fire ogres. However, the kill will be very slow, and the paladin will be in danger. And lots of orcs might filter through and get to your archers while the paladin's occupied. Having the physics upgrade from the Steel Weaver helps immensely, as your pusher trap will keep the ogres perpetually disabled. That's a whole other topic though. We'll have a lot more fun with pusher traps in a bit. Now, regular and fire ogres are minor league stuff, so I want to talk about the toughest ogre, the armored ogre. This guy has an incredible amount of health. Trying to kill him with just fireballs or headshots is a waste of time. If there's just one, yeah, you might be able to kill him eventually, but many levels, especially Finale, will throw these guys at you 3 or 4 at a time. Armored ogres wipe out 10 rift points if they make it through, which will usually finish you off even if you aren't playing for 5 skulls every round. Fortunately, the sword is still highly effective even against this guy. Just remember, 6 slashes if you're right on top of him, 5 if you have to run in. If you wait too long, he'll get out of freeze and stun you. You can also boost the duration with a right click freeze, but be careful. It's best to wait for him to be distracted by Guardian before using that. The swinging mace freeze technique also dominates armored ogres. That leaves one last ogre variety, the mighty frost ogre. Though this guy has a lot less health than the armored ogre, being immune to freeze is a serious problem. You're left with your weak crossbow stun as the only way to stop him in his tracks, and I don't recommend it. Instead, the best technique is either careful use of fireballs or the ballista. Of course, the ballista is not always available or easy to use, but try to use it when you can. For fireballs, make sure you wait for the damage over time component to run out before you cast it again. If you cast it too fast, you'll waste the extra damage. 3 or 4 fireballs does the trick, but you'll have a tough time if you don't have a stun paladin tanking for you. You can still kite one around, but you're putting yourself at risk when wasting huge amounts of time. There isn't much you can do to prevent that, just try your best. On some levels, like Chaos Chamber, you might find yourself kiting around a couple ogres at once. This can get hairy, but it's doable if you have a lot of open space and if you trust your trap gauntlet to clear everything else. Try to hit both at once by aiming at the floor. Also, remember that you gain double mana regeneration while standing next to the rift. In a last-ditch situation, you can just stand there and possibly spam fireballs on a low-health frost ogre to finish them just in the nick of time. Alright, well, we've talked about using your war mage to kill ogres, but I want to finish off with a couple of dirty tricks that will completely shut down the ogres if you manage to pull it off. While these setups can be somewhat unwieldy and not necessarily usable in every level, when you can do this, you should. The first is the barricade maze technique. In a 3-block wide hallway, you simply replace the middle lane with barricades and then block off one of the other 2 lanes. On the blocked lane, you put all wall blades, and on the open lane, you put pushers. This cruel device sends enemy monsters over the barricades and forces them to walk through a wall blade gauntlet just to run into the pushers again. The best part, with the physics upgrade, ogres are just as vulnerable. They'll never escape. Now, this takes some time, but it's very fire and forget, and it works with or without ceiling traps. Now, there is one huge downside to the setup. You can't put guardians near it, and you can't use it with cobalt sappers. Sappers simply blow up the barricades, and guardians attract attacks from crossbow orcs and anything else that reaches the end of the maze. These attacks will often miss or simply splash over to the barricades, often destroying them and ruining the trick. Fortunately, you don't really need the guardians here, so it's okay. In the case of sappers, if you watch your nightmare walkthrough ahead of time and you know what ways to produce sappers, you could be ready and shoot them down before they get to the choke point. Doesn't always work, but you might be able to pull off sometimes. The setup is also only so-so against kobold runners. You might want guardians near your rift as the last line of defense, or simply address the runners yourself with a fireball. The physics traps are also wonderful for pushing ogres in the lava and acid pits. Nothing is funnier than watching ogres soar through the air after stepping on a spring trap. The tower is practically made for this sort of thing, but you can do it on Chaos Chamber and a bunch of other levels too. Spring traps are a very niche trap though, so plan ahead and only use this for specific situations. The last and most devious technique for dealing with ogres is the incredible spore trap. You never want to simply deploy these things because they're going to get triggered by kobold runners and orcs. Instead, you want to hold onto them and only drop them at certain pre-planned times, or as a last result against a rampaging armored ogre. Each converted ogre is like a free paladin, so really that 1200 coin price tag is a bargain. Spore trap strategies are very fun and satisfying, so keep that in mind for tough ogre levels. As a side note for spores, you can also spore no hunters and turn them into pretty effective ogre killers. It's not as effective as directly sporing the ogres, but it might be easier for you to implement depending on the level. After all, hunters will leave the orc horde to chase you, so it's easier to lure them into your traps. With ogres, sometimes separating from the horde is tough. When I want to spore an ogre, I usually try to piss it off with arrows and stun or freeze it until I can kill any orcs that follow it. Once I'm certain my spore won't be wasted on lesser creatures, I drop it. This is a bit time consuming, so you have to watch out for kobold runners, flyers, and other nuisances so they don't sneak into your rift while you're busy. Well, that's all for today for the Ogre Guide. We covered a lot of different strategies: freezing, slashing, hacking, trapping. Hopefully this should help you deal with ogres in the toughest levels like Finale. Coming up soon is episode 4, we're going to cover flyers and hobgoblin shamans. These are the gimmick monsters of Orcs Must Die, so stay tuned for that. Please remember to toss us a thumbs up and subscribe to the Orcs Must Die show. Myself and Pallytime are completing a very long Nightmare walkthrough series, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching. This has been Cromar with TGN.